Welcome back to The Road Forward, a podcast for trucking industry leaders, brought to you by TruckSpy, the all-in-one fleet management platform built to empower your drivers to be productive, compliant, and safe. My name's Alex, and today on the podcast we got Eric Larson. He is a freight broker who used to be a Landstar agent, and he's a $1 million agent, which I think means something in Landstar terms. But more importantly, he's been a freight broker for 14 years, and he has some really strong opinions on where the industry is and what both carriers and brokers are doing wrong. So let's get started. Eric, how are you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me on. So I used to be a $1 million agent with Landstar. Now I'm on my own, doing my own brokerage for the last 12 years. So I just want to make sure we correct that, just so I don't catch any hate.
Fair enough. But we've talked about this before, and it seems like there's an issue, right? That both carriers and brokers are doing or not doing their job. Brokers seem to be overstepping, especially with this recent C.H. Robinson lawsuit, and carriers don't know their responsibilities, and so they're not doing enough work, right? So can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Obviously, over the years, the freight broker has become different things. Like what your job as a freight broker is to be that middleman, be that middle person. A freight broker never takes possession of the freight. It is a freight forwarder can, a carrier can, a shipper, receiver, but a freight broker never takes possession of the freight. So by never taking possession of the freight, there are certain criteria and things that you, as a freight broker, should be very careful not to do. And over the years, freight brokers have more and more taken that role. And as a freight broker, you're not allowed to take a supervisory role into somebody else's company. It makes you...
And a supervisory role, like there's obviously definitions, and like what actions or what behaviors would consider a supervisory role?
Yeah, so there's been a couple court cases, and C.H. Robinson seems to be the main one to peg because, at that point they have a lot of money. But examples that... there was a case where C.H. Robinson called the driver directly and was interacting with the driver in regards to taking temperatures on a refrigerated load and saying, hey, you have to call us every 4 hours and let us know the temperatures and so on and so on. Well, eventually there was a case that there was a wreck, and the driver basically said, hey, because of the all this criteria that they put on me, I felt pressured and things like this. So the courts basically said, look, when you take a supervisory role in regards to, let's say, talking to a driver, check calls, speaking directly with them, making decisions, you and the driver are now making decisions rather than going through the carrier, you become a partnering agent. And that partnering agent puts you in a category that you are in now direct line of lawsuit. So if something were to happen, your brokers like to place themselves into that direct line of lawsuit. Well, with the last case that just happened, which would be C.H. Robinson versus Miller, these are now becoming what is known in the trucking industry as nuclear verdicts. And nuclear verdicts means mega money, right? It's no longer just...
I think the definition, I think the technical definition is like $10 million or more
Correct.
Awarded settlement or something like that, right?
Correct.
That's a nuclear verdict, $10 million or more.
Verdict. So it's now brokers are getting involved in nuclear verdicts. So it's one of those things that wasn't... It's always happened and it's always been there, but now you have large sums of money that are getting sued for. And it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court was supposed to hear it, and the Ninth District Court it got kicked back down to them, and the Supreme Court said they wouldn't hear it. But it's starting to set a precedent in regards to that. So as a freight broker, your job is, like I said, is to be that middle person. If you're looking to give your customer information based on your knowledge of the industry. Hey, this load should be approximately here to here, $1,000 to $2,000. But let me go ahead and reach out to some of my network drivers or some of my drivers that I know or carriers that I know and things like that. And let me see where they're at with it. And then you come back. You should be getting a price from that carrier and then coming back to the customer and saying, well, here's the price. Here's what we can move it for. Let's say, so if it was $1,000 to $2,000, you would go to your carrier and say, what can you do this for? Right. And They should give you a price back. And then let's say it's $1,500, and you might go to your customer and say, okay, the price is $1,800, or I'm using simple numbers, but it's not your job to tell the shipper this will cost this, or the carrier I'm only paying this. Again, this is in my opinion, but it's not technically, a lot of brokers go overstretch there, in my opinion.
So to kind of sum that up, brokers they are overstepping, right?
Mhm.
They are overstepping by telling by like not correctly communicating to the customers their responsibilities, but also they're overstepping by talking to drivers directly. And so that in turn opens them up to the lawsuits. But you're saying that carriers, because the brokers started to slowly overstep, the carriers kind of started to backtrack. And now what carriers are doing is they're just calling brokers and asking, hey, how much are you paying on this? And that's a problem for a carrier, correct?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that too is the spot markets with the load boards where I can post my price. So if I've already posted my price, I've already established that mentally in your head, right? $1,500 is in your head now because that's what he's looking to pay. Rather than say, okay, the load's going from here to here, calling me up and saying, can you tell me about the load? Sure, it needs straps, it needs this, it needs tarp, whatever, giving you all the pertinent information for you to then say, okay, according to this, I'm going to be 1875. You know what I mean? Because and I try to explain this the best way in regards to so we can understand this is if a plumber were to come to your house because your toilet's broke or you've got a leak underneath your tub, he's going to walk in, he's going to say, show me the bathroom. And he's going to go through the bathroom, he's going to take a look, he's going to take whatever he's going to do, and he's going to come out and he's going to say, okay, it looks like it's going to be about 5 hours. I'm $125 an hour. That's my price. He never comes out of that bathroom and says, well, I took a look. Can I happen to know right now what you have in your bank account and how many credit cards you have and the where are you on available credit for your credit card? They don't do that.
Right. You the customer, you the homeowner asks the plumber, what do you charge? And the customer gives you the plumber gives you a price. He doesn't say, well, how much can you afford to spend?
Correct.
Right. The plumber does not say that.
Correct.
And that's a really big distinction. And I know just a personal story. It's like, I know when I started and I was on the load board and doing that whole thing, trying to book loads. There was a thing in my head where I was like, I will not call a broker if they do not post a price.
Yes.
Right. And so that's incorrect. Don't do that.
Don't do that.
You as a motor carrier, you need to know, hey, it costs me $2 a mile to move my truck. So if I want to shoot for a 10% profit, that means I cannot haul a single thing under 220.
Correct.
And so then you want to work your numbers out so that you know your own numbers. Now, so you shouldn't care what the brokers actually charge the customer. You need to know your numbers because, like any great plumber, a plumber goes like, hey, I went through school or whatever the case may be. My truck gets 10, 15 miles a gallon. I take like a job site usually takes this long. Like it's very common that like all businesses have a price point up front and then the customer can take it or leave it. But trucking seems to be a little bit different. And that is a very interesting distinction. So if you're a carrier, pay attention because this is important.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you need to do is, and what's key for a carrier to know, because like I said, and I've explained this, and just so everybody knows, I'm a CDL holder. I used to have a carrier. I have my brokerage, so I've been an owner-operator. My job as a carrier, and sometimes I can do it faster than other people as you gain experiences. Know how much I need to make, just like you said. Okay, so I need to be 220. Is this load going from Texas to Wyoming? Because if it's going to Wyoming, I'm not going to be able to get a load unless I had 350 miles to Denver or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So I better calculate a little bit of fuel down to Denver because I know I can get a load at Denver. Or is it putting me in Atlanta, Georgia? You know what I mean? Where I'm not worried about deadheading out of here. You know what I'm saying? So it's those calculations you have to be able to do as a business owner to factor that into that 220 before you give me that price. Right. So at that point, you're saying 220, but it's going to Wyoming. So let's say 265 to get me, because that'll also get me down to Denver. And I know I can get some freight out of Denver. I'm just, obviously throwing stuff out of there. And that's what makes experienced carriers good at what they do. I'll tell you what, when somebody calls me and says, how much are you paying? And we're going back and forth and they keep saying, well, I don't know. What are you paying? What are you paying? The carriers that call me and say, here's what I need are always better carriers. They're always the better carriers. They know how to do their job. Right. I don't have problems with them. The driver's on time. It is amazing the difference just when a carrier calls me and says, I'm going to be 270. I do oversized freight, so just so everybody knows, my numbers might be a little higher than normal. I need 275 for this load. And bam. And compared to how much do you need? How much are you paying?
Yeah, and I like, and a couple of things. I don't want to forget exactly what you're saying. And so the key thing though is for trucking business owners, right? We like a broker or a customer doesn't expect you to know all of the lane rate data, right? So there's definitely tools out there. So it's like maybe you don't run a Texas to Wyoming load and you don't know that there's no loads in Wyoming. Like that doesn't mean you have to know everything about every lane in the United States. So first option would be, number one, is get familiar with some tools that can give you that data. That's option one. But option two, as a motor carrier, when you're starting out and you are new and you don't have experience, focus on a lane. That would probably be some good advice, right?
Correct.
If a customer calls you and says, hey, I got a Texas to Wyoming, but all you do is a Texas to Illinois, maybe say no to that load, right? Maybe say no, because you want to focus on the lanes that you do know in that case. So it's either use the tools or stick to the experience that you have, which is knowing your exact lane. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
That's usually my most experienced people, is that the ones that call me know they give me the price. They don't even ask my price. They don't care about my price, right? They're just saying, hey, you got a load going from here to here. Now, they're not going to give me $17 a mile if it should only be paying $2 a mile, let's say. But they're not, and a lot of times they're looking at it as here's my price. It's a realistic price. And a lot of times, as a freight broker, on a spot market quote, I should be going back and saying, okay, let me talk to my customer. And it's not, hey, you're too high. It should be, okay, give me some help selling this. How are you empty right now? How far away are you? Do you have a full clock? What are we kind of looking at? What time you think you can get there? Okay, you could be there in an hour. All right, I'll call you right back. Now I go to my customer and I say, okay, let's say you use $2,000 to make it simple. Now I go to my customer and I say, all right, I've got a truck. He's 100 miles away. He's empty right now. He's got a full clock. He could be here by 2. He's a 53-foot van, food grade van, whatever. His price is price to cover this one is 25. And I'm just using simple numbers. I might only get, it might be 22, but I'm just going to use simple numbers. So now I go to the customer and I'm saying, do you want me to schedule this guy? I need to know as soon as possible because I told him to give me 10 minutes. And a lot of times understand that the person in the shipping office that I'm talking to is just the transportation manager. He has a boss he has to answer to. Okay, it's not an open checkbook. It's not I can charge whatever I want. So now he might have to check and say, okay, we got a truck. Next thing you know, he calls me back or he sends me an email. He says, schedule it. And then I call the carrier back and I say, we're on. Here's the, give me your email or blah, blah, blah. How do you want me to send this information to the, I'm assuming that the driver is also the carrier. I'm not, okay, just so I'm on this situation. Mm-hmm. And if it's not, I never talk to a driver. But either way, I send the paperwork over and we're rocking and rolling. I'm playing that middle role. It's not my job to say you're too high, that's too expensive, because that's your price.
Right. So the customer needs to say that.
Correct.
So that needs to come from the customer, correct?
Correct.
And this is the issue where brokers are locking in rates before they even lock in a truck, and then they remove that room for negotiation, and so then they end up just finding the cheapest carrier. So in turn, they are saving the customers some money, but then when the service isn't there, or you got trucks, or whether it's the Colorado accident, or where guys got no training and their brakes overheated, and so you're seeing a lot of these safety issues now, or a lot of these accidents and nuclear lawsuits or nuclear verdicts, because at the end of the day, brokers are just undercutting the price as much as possible and then just finding the cheapest carrier possible. And the customer in that scenario that you painted out, the customer could certainly say, hey, this doesn't need to be picked up right now. I want to find a cheaper rate, so I will give you 48 hours to find a truck, right? So the customer can then negotiate through you. But again, that could be blamed a little bit on the customer, right? They could say like, hey, I'm paying $1,500 find a truck for it.
Right. And a lot of times a customer might come in and say, look, we've budgeted $1,500 to move this. That's what we have in our budget. So I need to stay as close to $1,500 as possible or I'm losing money. So, because I can't go back to my customer and ask for more money because there's no reason, right? So a lot of times, because and so everybody knows there's no empty checkbook. Every shipper manufacturer is competing against other manufacturers, right? So one of the first, when there's cost overages, one of the first things they pull from is transportation because it's the last thing to make it move. And people don't realize. So they might have had $2,500 in there, but there was a cost overrun on overtime. And they said, well, where are we pulling this money from? Well, let's take it out of shipping. We'll just find a cheaper truck. We'll wait for that problem in the end. That happens. And the
Right.
next thing you know, I get something
Right.
that should move for $2,000, and I'm getting a phone call saying all we have is $1,000 in it because we had some cost overruns. We pulled from the transportation funds. What can you do for us? It's like, oh God,
Right. Yeah.
okay,
I know there's so many steps along the way that can go wrong. And then the last step is we need to find a truck for it. And it's like, oh, okay, great. So then as little as physically possible, we want to spend on this. So it's like that seems certainly to be the case. But I want to add that like, like I totally saw this transition that you're talking about of like, I'm not calling any brokers. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm not calling any brokers that don't post a price to here's my price. We're an hour away and we have good tarps and good trucks. Like I totally made that transition, and that's a highly recommended transition for all carriers to make, right? You're coming from like you said in the beginning, you have experience as a motor carrier. I was a motor carrier on the road for several years. And like, that is the place you want to get yourself to, where you're training your staff to say, like, first of all, call on freight where your trucks are close by. Like, don't book a load that's, there's no point in lying to the broker because that's not how you build relationships. But so call on freight that's near your area, and then explain to them on the phone that, hey, my truck is an hour or two away. We have good actual truck tarps if you're a flatbedder, right? Or, hey, we have a good reefer unit if you're a refrigerated trailer, and explain to them why they should use you. But always at the end, so I give all the, like, here's what we do really well, and then I say, but I'm going to need $220 a mile on this. Right. And then the broker tells me, hey, that's not something we can do. And oftentimes we would call, and oftentimes we would say, all right, that's fine. We can't haul it for less than that. And so, we would have to let go. And so depending on the economy and the truck markets and the lanes, like, you want to see what the decision is, whether you want to take whatever the rate that they gave you, or maybe negotiate, meet in the middle or something like that. But really, you want to start talking to customers yourself once you get more experience and more knowledge. So I know that was a very, very healthy transition for my company when we switched from, hey, if if there's no rate posted, don't call, to let's try to sell ourselves, because at the end of the day, the dispatchers are a sales department. So that was a really healthy transition, and helped the company a lot for sure.
Real quick, and one of the things too is, remember what you're doing now as a motor carrier. You have your own numbers. You're a motor carrier. The goal is you to get direct customers. That's the goal for you, to get direct customers. If you there's no way you're going to walk into a direct customer and say, how much do you have in the load?
Right.
They're going to throw you out the door in the beginning. So you want to be able to teach yourself use brokers to train yourself on how to talk to customers.
Right.
I mean, because if you have a brokerage right now, let's say you're calling a certain brokerage and you don't like the person on the phone, you can hang up, dial again, and get somebody new. That doesn't happen in the shipping department. You will call and say, can I have the shipping department? Oh, I don't want to talk to that guy. Oh, well, he's our only shipping person. Oh, never mind. You know what I mean? So teach yourself by using brokers how you're eventually going to run your business when you go for direct customers. And it's not going to be, how much money do you have in the load? It's going to be, this is what I can do it for. Is that something that will work for you?
That's a really good, like, that's a perspective, or a thinking change, right? It's like, don't think of a broker as somebody that's taking money off the top or something like that, but think of it like, this is your customer in this current instance. And it's like, if this was a shipper or a direct customer, how would you talk to them? And you would probably tell them that, like, hey, we're locally in the area. We can pick up loads once a week, but we would need this much. And it's like, that's the exact conversation you want to have with your brokers when you're trying to book loads off the spot market. Is that like, granted, that there's a concern there, but is it because greed? Like, have brokers started to take too much? Like, have the broker services become too expensive, and because of the transparency laws not being as clear or something? Like first of all, let's talk about transparency. That might be before we go down. Talk to me about transparency. I know for a fact, as a motor carrier, I was a motor carrier for 6 years. I didn't even know there were transparency laws on the books, but I think you know this a little bit better than I do. So first of all, educate us on what are the transparency laws. What are they for?
There's a U.S. code, and maybe you can throw it up on the screen when we do this, but there's a U.S. code. I think it's 14 something, but it's an actual U.S. code. So in regards to broker transparency, it requires all people involved in the movement of the freight, I'm kind of paraphrasing, to be able to come in and see what everything is paying. So as a broker, what the shipper's paying, what the carrier's getting, what I'm paying, everybody that's involved in this movement of this shipment is allowed to come into the other person's office during their work hours, basically at their convenience, and take a look at how much I actually billed. Now, Again, I'm not a lawyer, no, nor is Alex here. But one of the things that I see this most used for is if there's a lawsuit. Nobody needs a subpoena. They can come right in and pull records because most truck drivers aren't going to show up at an office of a freight broker up in Missouri when they're from Atlanta during their off hours, during the day, parking in. But a lawyer will. So it's a lot of times if there's a wreck or a law, lawyers want to be able to see how much money was involved in this, how much money everybody has, and a lawyer can come in. Now, the problem it also stems from is if I'm moving volume with, let's say, a huge person like a Niagara Water or a huge person that's moving a lot of freight, I'm not billing them per load. I'm billing them a lump sum, right? Here's what we moved. Right. And a lot of times some brokers, when it comes to volume, they might mark up 5% on every load, 6% on every load. So every load that I move, there's a 5% markup or a 6% markup if there's a lot of volume. If there's not a lot of volume, there might be a 15% markup on a load. And the more volume that customer gives. But in regards to the transparency, technically, after the load is done, a carrier or a shipper can come in to my office and see exactly what I paid. Now, the paperwork can't leave. But they're welcome to come in and take a look at how much it paid, who was picked up, who was delivered, where it went, who did the ordering, and all that information.
Right, and I was able to pull it up. It's the 49 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 371.3.
Yes.
And it is, a broker shall keep a record of each transaction for purpose of this section. Brokers may keep master lists of consignors and the address and registration number of the carrier, rather than repeating this information for each transaction. The record shall show the name and address of the consignor, the name, address, and registration number of the originating motor carrier, bill of lading, or freight bill number, the amount of compensation received by the broker for the brokerage service performed, and the name of the payer, a description of any non-brokerage services performed in connection with each shipment and other activity, and the amount of compensation received for the service, and the name of the payer, and the amount any freight charges collected by the broker and date of payment to the carrier. Then it goes down and say that brokers shall keep the records required by the section for a period of 3 years. Yep. Each party to a brokered transaction, okay, and this is the key one. So each party to a brokered transaction has the right to review the record of the transaction required to be kept by these rules. Okay?
Correct.
So each party, so the shipper, receiver, freight broker, and motor carrier. But the issue is, of course, that some brokers. Now, while I was trying to search this up, a quick side note: the FMCSA had this past year opened up for comments for like proof of brokers violating or brokers price gouging. They opened that up, and several articles in a row came up and saying rare evidence support that brokers are price gouging. So more than likely, it is not the case that brokers are price gouging. Right. But I think there is that thing like, well, I'm doing all the work. Why should you get a cut in the first place? And because oftentimes in a broker agreement, you waive your right to review this. I think this is where the issue arises out of this, correct? Right.
Yeah, and it's frustrating. I remember also somewhere, and I have to pull up the case, but there was also something that said, look, I have to pay I can't hire somebody. If I've got $5,000 for the load, the last thing I want to do is pay $1,000 for the load, because I'm obviously hiring a carrier that is way, way underpaid and probably running crappy equipment. So that goes against my job as a broker. My job as a broker is to make sure that the carrier that I'm hiring has the proper safety and is good at what they do. So I obviously can't have $5,000 on a load and pay $1,000 to a carrier. And I'm going to have to assume that carrier does not have that very good of a record if they're willing to take it for that. So that's another thing that they can come in and say, okay, look, now in regards to waiving this, you waive a lot of things. One thing that every carrier should know about that does not pertain to a broker, but the broker should know about it, is CARMAC. You should be fully aware of CARMAC. CARMAC is CARMAC Amendment. You should look that up. It was established, I believe, in 26, basically, that are, rules what your obligations are as a carrier. It tells you about being able to hold a load and for payment and things like that. That should be one thing. And the transparency. One of the reasons this gets waived, and what people don't want to hear, is that a lot of times I sign what's called a non-disclosure agreement, meaning I can't tell anybody what this load paid me, how much I got from the shipper, because a lot of times shippers are manufacturers, let's say. Now,
Right.
they're marking freight up also for problems. So let's use an example. I'll use simple numbers. I might go to the shipper and say, I've got a truck for 2,000. That shipper might say 3,000 to the person buying the item, the receiver.
Right.
Okay. They might mark it up $1,000 to cover, let's say, the cost of the crane on their end to load it, the fact that they've got to pay me before they're paid. If there's any type of detention, they're not going to go back to their customer. They're just going to go ahead and pay me from that. But they mark that freight up. And I can give an example of when this happened to me, if you'd like.
Right.
But if the receiver finds out that the freight was marked up by the manufacturing party, they might get into a disagreement about that markup. They might think it's too high. They might think that, what are you doing that for? You know what I mean? Blah, blah, blah. But this stuff happens. Sometimes it's needed because they know, like there's been one that we know there's going to be detention on the receiving end. So my manufacturer has basically said, we're going to upcharge and then let us know how much. And then they cover it through that upcharge in the end. But what happens if there's no detention on that end? And that's usually the stuff that it is marked up by other people than just, the broker, right?
Right. So the price that a receiver, when you're buying something, the price that they pay. And again, another example is eBay too. eBay comes to mind because of this. Like a more practical, right, straightforward approach is when you're buying something on eBay, right, and it says $12.95 for shipping, right? I know a lot of times there's free shipping, but that's because it comes out of the profit of the product they're selling. But when you see on an eBay listing, let's say you're shopping for something and it says $12.95 for shipping, the shipping actually might have only cost $7, right? Or $8. You don't know. Maybe they packaged it a little bit. So this is the exact same situation. Now imagine a high volume shipper where now some of their profit comes from upcharging their customers on that. Like, is that a dishonest business practice? I don't know. The customer at the end of the day agrees to pay a rate. So it seems fair. And so carriers and brokers may sign and this is the reason we're talking about it, they may be signing an NDA or they may be waiving their right to review the broker records because of situations like this. This is what we're getting at, correct?
Correct. And exactly. And there's time, like even that eBay situation. So let's say it's $12.99 for shipping, but it's only $6. Well, you still had to wrap it, box it, go to drop it off at the UBS store or wherever you're shipping it from. That's all time, right? That's all calculated time. That now think about if you're working at an eBay store and you're paying somebody $15 an hour nowadays to go and take that to the eBay store to wrap it and stuff. So it might take 30 minutes. So it costs you $7 to ship it and $7 for the employee to wrap it, box it, and drop it off. So this is kind of what manufacturers and shippers are looking at, right? There's a markup on the cost to get it loaded onto the truck. There's, to pay me, to hire an accountant to pay me, to hire the transportation guy who might have talked to me for 15, 20 minutes. This is all business, right? So there are markups on these things. So, but a lot of people, as we all know, I mean, I'm in shipping and I like using free shipping, even though mentally I know it's in the price of the item, it's still free shipping. So this is kind of, this is what we do in this industry. It's what we do as people.
Right, but in trucking, obviously, that can't be the case because I specifically remember I was transporting a load, and the load actually cost only $3,000 to make, and it was a cross-country move, and they actually paid me $4,000 to move it. So it's like it would be impossible to include shipping cost into items like that, and so it's like this is why sometimes they do that where it's like, hey, the shipping cost is going to be $4,000, and then but they actually only gave it to the trucking company for $2,500 because there was a broker cut in there, there was the material wrapping employee cost in there, so there's a lot of expenses, and at the end of the day, just like with the eBay example, no one's forcing you to buy something on eBay. You have a free market choice, and it's like same thing. A big company buys a specific product from a business. They'll they just want the product received and that's it. And so I'm sympathetic to truckers that say like, oh, we're getting the short end of the stick. I am sympathetic, but oftentimes it is just business. And so, but I do want to move on from this, and like we briefly mentioned it, right? And some of your experience, right? You said you started out as a motor carrier, or you were a motor carrier and broker. Give us some of the stuff. Give us some of your experience, some of the career highlights.
Yeah. So basically, when I started out driving, I was 21 years old. Drove for like Schneider, and then I drove locally for U.S. Food Service. I went in the Coast Guard. I left the Coast Guard and went back into trucking. Drove for CR England as a lease driver. Did that for like 30 days, and I'm like, this ain't it. Bought my own truck. And then when I drove for Landstar, FedEx Cups and Critical as a tractor trailer driver, and then my wife became a Landstar agent. And then in 2008, we had a recession, sort of like we do now, and I had to decide between the freight brokerage and the truck. And I picked the freight brokerage, and then from there, I basically rolled into out of leaving Landstar, opening up my own brokerage, and specializing now into overdimensional freight. For me, it was smarter to go quality rather than quantity as a one-man show with doing what I did. So I've been doing overdimensional freight and very, very little legal stuff for the last 12 years. But what I did want to mention real quick, too, is you mentioned the price gouging type thing. And understand, and I bring this to drivers, oh, you're price gouging the driver. No, I'm actually price gouging the shipper, right? And I'm actually price gouging the shipper for $3,000 and paying $1,000 to a carrier. So it's not. So the issue is that one of those things that's actually when freight brokers price gouge, they're actually price gouging the shipper, not the driver.
Right, because they could be giving the shipper a discount, but they're not for some reason, right?
Correct. I could be moving it for $1,500. So if the price gouging thing comes in, shippers are still not going to pay $3,000 and give you more money to haul it because you just hauled it for $1,000. So why? And I have this conversation with drivers all the time. You just hauled it for $1,000 for 5 weeks in a row. You found out that I was getting $2,000. You want to cut me out and then split the money with the shipper. And the shipper's going to be like, cool, I'll see you next week and I'll cut you a check for $1,000. It's like, well, no, I want $1,500. Why do you want $1,500 when you've been moving it for 5 weeks for $1,000?
Right.
Why would you've already moving it for 5 weeks for $1,000?
Right.
I'm not your sponsor. You know what I mean? So and this is where drivers don't understand is that it's not going to raise your rate because you don't name your own rate, because you don't come in there and say, I need this much to run my business. You're not helping yourself with that. The best way to help yourself as a driver is to know your rates and go in there saying, this is my rate and this is why I need this money. And I'll be there in 20 minutes if you can make it happen. That raises your rates.
And we've sat down on this show actually with numerous guests, and we talked about safety and how safety can improve your rates, how technology like that can improve your rates. So there's many things that a carrier can do to really ultimately what it comes down to is setting themselves apart from the competition. There's many things a carrier can do, and that is an important part. Make sure as a carrier and even as a broker, right? It's like maybe your communication is better. Like I remember the origin story of TQL. Their whole shtick was like, I'm annoyed that I can't get a hold of a broker 24/7. Like that was the TQL whole shtick is like they wanted to be a 24/7 broker. And so they were pioneers in that. And so it's like what is going to give your company the competitive edge, the competitive advantage. So you want to really make sure you're looking into that. But this is called the road forward. And so I know trucking has a lot of ups and downs, and there's a lot of technology, it seems like, on the horizon. Like where do you see the industry going as a whole? Where do you see brokers going? Because in my opinion, just like with stockbrokers, right? It's like, do you use a stockbroker now? Probably not. Just like with real estate brokers, there's more tech firms. Like, where do you see what is the road forward for freight brokers?
Well, as always, you're wrong. Just want to say no. It's one of those things that with freight brokers, carriers, we're already seeing the push towards the self-driving trucks, right? That's a push that's happening in other countries, in China, the Belt Road Initiative. They've got roads dedicated to moving those self-driving trucks. And I explain this in regards to freight brokers. If you're a freight broker that just sits at the screen and takes a load from your shipper and sticks it on the load board, you're already a waste, right? There's no need for you. I can already, but what freight brokers actually do is, one, they take liability off the shipper. And there's a good story. And if you ever want to cover this, if you Google turtle hot tubs out of Colorado, one hot tub to make is 18 moves. There is 18 logistical moves from 3 different countries and a bunch of different states. And if you Google it, it's a very short story that you can actually see how one hot tub takes 18 logistical moves. And that's what a freight broker does. He makes all those 18 logistical moves and allows the shipper to focus on making the hot tub and not moving the hot tub. And I always suggest that carriers read that and see that and take a look at that and to understand how much actually goes into various countries, everything from boats to planes to trucks, to big trucks to little trucks to put together one hot tub. Mm-hmm. And that's so in regards to logistics, I think you're going to start to see a lot more logistical companies possibly merging and buying out and moving things and moving a lot more towards a software aspect of it. But I think you're going to see a lot more of the, unfortunately, the mom and pops per se, brokerages being eaten up by the technology. So it's not that you're going to get rid of, you're going to see the mom and pop smaller brokerages getting eaten up by the technology because they can't handle the shipping, the flights, and all of the 18 move processes. Right. In regards to that aspect. So you're going to see more of the TQLs, the CH Robinsons, the big ones, and less of the littler ones as technology comes up, because you're still going to want that. One, the shippers are still going to want to say, look, I'm not in logistics. I don't want to handle this. Just make it happen. Get me all my parts I need to put this hot tub together. Right. I don't want the liability. I don't want the responsibility for that. I got hot tubs to make. But as we have problems with obviously trying to find people to do this, the actual logistical, it's going to be more than a logistics person rather than just a freight broker. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. So there's definitely going to be some consolidation in the marketplace of the freight broker. And it seems like you're either going to have a little bit more experience and handle the more challenging moves. Maybe there's going to be several different modes, or maybe it's like in your situation, which is overdimensional freight. That's not something a robot or a computer or software can fix. Like at the end of the day, when it's, 19 feet wide or whatever and 10 feet tall, and it needs a 14 different, if there's many moving parts, it for sure will not be something technology will solve.
Correct.
However, the consolidation will come from all those brokers that are moving generic freight.
Right.
If your load goes into dry van and you're still working with that customer, I mean, software will make it easier to hire the other company instead of you. And so do you have any advice for small mom and pop freight brokers, what they could do to prepare for this? Maybe go get a CDL, get into a truck?
You're going to want, no. But no, it's one of those things that they're going to want to specify or specialize in what they do. They're going to want to find that. I mean, it's the same thing. Like, obviously, consolidation happens all the time. Walmart comes in and wipes out little grocery stores, right? That just stuff happens. But it's going to, my opinion, van is the easiest. And I say this all the time to drivers, too. It's like, when next time you're at a truck stop, tell me how many vans are sitting around. You got a drone? Send that drone up and take a look at all those trucks sitting there. How can you pick yours out from everybody else, right? How can you be the woman in the red dress, in the Matrix, right? And the same thing as a freight broker. If you can't be the woman in the red dress, be that that freight broker, have some type of specialty, and you're just taking a load from your shipper and posting it on the load board, you're already obsolete with the load board. The load board already made you obsolete, right? So you better find how you can actually benefit more, and it's more about networking. Like I always tell freight brokers, call carriers before you call customers. Sell a carrier to a customer, right? I mean, if you call a customer and you have a load without a truck, you're a con man, basically. You don't have a truck. I got a 10,000 truck. No, you have a load board. That's not the truth, right? But if you have carriers that you can go to, if you're a carrier wanting to get in this, find a carrier that you can almost be a salesperson for them and say, look, I'm looking for customers in this area. I notice you're in this area. If I start to get into this customer's store, would you be willing to be my first go-to, the first right to refusal for this freight if I was able to offer this to you? And if a carrier's smart, they're going to say, yeah, sure, let me see what you got. And next thing I know, I can go back to that customer and say, okay, look, I'm working with a 10 truck carrier in this area. If you can be their outbound freight, I could probably get you some, decent freight or decent prices, realistic prices. They know the difference between a spot market price and an actual contracted price. They're willing to work with us long term. They're not looking for, a one load situation, and kind of negotiate that way with your customer to get in the door. You now have something to sell. The best thing I tell brokers to do is don't sell a load board. Find something to sell, because you're a salesman. When it comes down to it, you're a salesman. I got to sell it to the carrier. I got to sell it to the customer. How do I make this happen? And if you only have a customer giving you something and you don't have anybody to sell it to, it's easier to have somebody to sell it to work that middleman position. So as a freight broker, find carriers and then find customers that would help that carrier and be that middleman for that carrier and that customer, and put those two together through you. And then besides that, start to specialize in either open deck, stay out of oversized, because that's what I do. But no, I'm just kidding. That's the me being territorial. But that's let's try to find, if it's drayage, if it's ports, if it's containers, something that just not every Joe Schmo has knowledge in, and dive into it. Learn as much as you can about it. Yeah. Learn who the carriers are in that aspect, in that field, what it takes, the difference between a chassis and a container, a 40-foot container, or a 20-foot container, and all this other stuff. Learn what the differences are, so that you can provide the best information to your customer when they have questions.
Right. Well, there you go, folks. You heard it here first. Some advice for motor carriers, some advice for your freight brokerage, all from someone that has years and years of experience. So really good. Eric, thank you so much for coming on the show. That'll do it for this one. If you are enjoying the show and you want to leave us a review, please, we appreciate those. We especially like the 5-star ones, but you're more than welcome to share your thoughts with us in those reviews. So thank you so much, and we will see you in the next episode.